Thank you very much. I have the pleasure to kick off the fourth quarter of that conference. My name is Thomas Weber, and I want to talk about digital sovereignty today. A short history of my career. I used to work almost for 30 years in the private area, business area, so I have no public DNA. But I started 3 years ago as a CDO of a district here in the federal country of Hessen, which is called Main-Kinzig. It's the biggest district in this federal state. And my responsibility is to provide public services in a digital way to almost 500,000 inhabitants and civilians living in my district. But that's not the topic of my speak today. It is more about how to become sovereign in my ability to drive my strategy. And as is being mentioned, there is a very prominent former British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. She made a quote which is for me the guiding light of my daily business, and we will come to that at my last slide, just to extend the teaser. Sovereignty, I think we have to set the baseline first, and I've taken a look into what Wikipedia tells us about sovereignty in general, and it is the defining authority within an individual consciousness, social construct, or territory. This is very a generic term, and you see there are many derivations raising up in different areas where people try to claim sovereignty in their area of competence. Now, when it comes to digital sovereignty, I have seen a very, very smart quote coming from the World Economic Forum, where it states that, first of all, it distinguishes between 3 different types of sovereignty. It's cyber, technological, and data sovereignty. And it is all about to have the ability to have control over your own digital destiny when it comes to hardware, software, and data you rely on and create. And that's a very nice term. And then try to structure it into 3 layers just to guide us through a specific journey we would like to go through within the next 15 minutes. It's a physical layer. So where do we have or don't have sovereignty when it comes to infrastructure? It's a code layer, so the complete software area, and the data layer. And I was really worried about not to mention the term AI in my speech, so we will have a short outlook on sovereignty and AI in that journey as well. So first of all, digital sovereignty, is that in general a good or a bad thing? Is it just another burden which comes to us like GDPR or NIS2? No, it isn't. It is not an obligation to become sovereign in somebody's digital destiny. And it comes with pros and cons. And from a very high level perspective, you can say it fosters innovation, but it drives complexity. And these 2 artifacts, I would say, are the main decision drivers for companies in order to decide themselves in their strategy to which level of sovereignty I would like to become when it comes to digital. So our journey, as I said, will have a deeper look on 4 different areas with all the pros and cons attached to it. So we start from infrastructure, then we go over to code, which means software. Then we talk about data, and then we end up with artificial intelligence. And I will later on elaborate a little bit more on the huge topic of open source, which comes along with digital sovereignty on its own. So starting from the infrastructure point of view, we start with raw materials. And everybody who's watching the news today or in the last couple of weeks, you have seen that a raw material which is essential to build certain semiconductors, the rare earths, became an essential part in the negotiations between Ukraine and the USA. So in former times it was purely based on oil, gas, uranium, but now it becomes rare earths, which again leads to digital because it is used in semiconductors. So climbing up the ladder, and if we take a look on semiconductor businesses, we have to admit that Europe lost complete traction in that business. So the bulk of semiconductors are innovated and produced mainly in the Asian market, but also in the US market. We are just consumers of those devices. And semiconductors, for sure, are the building components of our IT infrastructure. And where it becomes very obvious how we lost sovereignty here in the infrastructure space is when you follow discussions around building up radio frequency networks like 5G, where the number of vendors in that space is very limited, and there are huge discussions going on. Do we hand over responsibility to build those infrastructures to a Chinese company or not? And these are political discussions, not technical discussions. So at the end of the day, we have to admit that when it comes to IT infrastructure, we almost lost all possibilities to define our own digital destiny in that area. We are dependent on others, and that shouldn't raise any worries on everybody's side, just awareness that there is very less opportunities to do something on somebody's own. There's a complete other picture when it comes to code. And here, I would like to start with, where does code make me not sovereign? And this is the area where it comes, where I have to sign subscription fees for commercial software. And when we see, especially in Germany, but I think that applies to all over Europe, how many business value, how many business processes, how many value chains rely on software coming from Microsoft or SAP, just to name two of the gorillas. I'm not sure if those companies can claim that they are complete sovereign in their strategy and decision-making process. I can remember short after I joined my role as a CDO, I was tied up in negotiations with a Microsoft partner to extend our subscription with Microsoft. And I never felt so upset like I felt myself in those negotiations. And this has had nothing to do with Microsoft. I'm not complaining about that company. I think the products are very, very good. They're stable. So the times of blue screens are almost over. But I was upset about my own weakness in those negotiations. I had no chance, not a single chance, to escape in some way. And I had no arguments to negotiate a lower price for ongoing subscriptions with Microsoft. And at that point of time, I developed a dream of myself. And I said, okay, there are 10 years more to go in business before I retire. And my dream is that my district becomes Microsoft free when I go in retirement. No single pence should flow out of my district into any pocket of Microsoft. And again, this is not a complaint about that company. I appreciate that company. But I'm one of 852 districts in Germany, and we just add up the number of euros which flows into Redmond. This is, for me, unbelievable, and I'm a taxpayer like you as well. So this is an obligation for me to work on. It's a hard way, but convenience zone is something I'm not feeling very well in, so I'm taking up the challenge. So the good thing is, besides these vendor lock-in effects, which is a very prominent area of being not sovereign, you have the complete field of open source. And I don't want to elaborate too much here because we will see it later. This is the option a company has to define and drive his own digital destiny with the pros and cons, which we'll discuss later on as well. At least we have an option here. When it comes to infrastructure, the options are very, very limited. Climbing up the ladder, and we reach the entire cloud discussion. Nobody of us can claim he is completely free out of these discussions. Some companies moved completely to the cloud. Some companies drive at least a hybrid model, but I don't think that there are companies here which purely rely on premise data centers. And there are 4 topics where somebody has to look into when it comes to move business processes, value chains into the cloud. And it's very much attached to legal uncertainties. Legal uncertainties with regards to data security and data privacy. The example Microsoft, for example, Microsoft forces me to go to the cloud because they discontinue the on-premise solutions. But when I ask my GDPR representative in the capital of Wiesbaden, capital of Hessen in Wiesbaden, and I'm asking him, am I allowed to do this? I don't get a yes, and I don't get a no. So it's based on my risk to do it. And I have no chance to not doing it. And that makes me feel not sovereign in my decision path. So there's a huge discussion around especially data privacy, because usually the cloud space is occupied by US-based hyperscalers. And the good news is they would like to stay in our market. So they have realized that there is something to do to convince European customers in order to move their processes and value chains into their clouds. So every of these vendors has a specific strategy to comply with GDPR rules. This is a good news at the end of the day. Another good news is even here, somebody has an option to choose from when he doesn't want to go to an hyperscaler coming from the US. And this is, again, based on open source software, the sovereign cloud stack, which provides the complete environment to run native cloud applications beside any hyperscalers. And you can do that on your own, or you can leverage from a managed service provided by some of the companies already. I had my presentation already finished before I submitted it, and then I saw this letter in the news. And this letter is basically coming from the European Parliament, where there is a committee which works on the EU-US data privacy framework. And in this letter, it is stated that the White House has removed all participants from the US out of this framework, so that the framework couldn't longer work and produce this data agreement between the two countries. And I have read statements in the news that some of them, some reporters mentioned, so if this process doesn't continue, that could mean the end of the operational procedures of the hyperscalers in Europe. And now I don't want to sit on the chair of somebody who moved already all his businesses into the cloud of Amazon or Microsoft. Unfortunately not yet. Just another proof point of how sensible you have to think about this area when it comes to drive your digital strategy. Last but not least, let's cover a little bit the area of IA. We have heard so many really exciting examples and use cases. And I want to catch up from my main topic here, digital sovereignty. What does it mean in terms of AI? So am I sovereign in driving my AI strategy? And I think there are some points you have to take a look onto. For example, computing capacity. Some of the large language models need computing capacity that almost none of the companies is able to afford themselves. So they automatically rely on services, again, provided out of a cloud. So that means if I have made a decision for a certain LLM and I want to run it on premise, it's not possible due to budget. And that makes me not very sovereign in my decision. The next point is data availability. We all know that when we want to have a certain quality coming out of a large language model, we have to train it. So where does the data come from to train those large language models? Are these data sufficient which I have in my own data center, or do I rely on other data? So again, I rely on somebody else, which doesn't make me very sovereign. And then this is an area, the last area, where neither the US or China is responsible for, is the number of people who are skilled to work in that area. Even if I have a strategy, even I have a plan, and I don't get a very good skilled workforce to drive this, doesn't make me very sovereign in executing my strategy. So this is absolutely not a political thing, but it is one artifact which I wanted to combine in this discussion. Again, we have good news. First of all, Europe woke up and would like to establish themselves in this huge AI market, and the EU have founded the Open Euro LLM Foundation, where a lot of researchers are coming together in order to provide AI models which are at least able to compete with the ones coming abroad. So that is a very good news, because this is funded from public money at the end of the day. The other good news, again, comes from open source software, because most of the technology which is used to get most out of the algorithm LLMs are based on is open source software. And the big benefit of open source, beside its pricing model, is a huge community which raises around open source. This is, for me, the biggest asset of open source. It's not the licensing model. It's a huge community which helps each other, which drives innovation, which shares knowledge, and which makes it very competitive to work with open source products. And at the end of the day, frameworks raising up. We know DevOps from software development. We have now a framework, machine learning operations. We have platforms where we can run on this. So this again moves me into the area to have more ownership about my strategy when it comes to AI. So even here, it's not a bottleneck. Like, again, in IT infrastructure, there are ways to get out. The question is, and this is especially a question in the lawyer area, can IA be open at all when data to be trained are not private or public? Or again, if I'm missing to spend enough money for the underlying hardware and I rely on services coming from some data centers. So this is a tricky question when it comes to AI and digital sovereignty. So a solution to many of these questions comes from open source. I think you are pretty much aware about what open source is. It is free software, which comes mainly in two different types of licenses. I mean, there's a huge variety of licenses attached to it, but it's mainly distinguished between permissive and non-permissive licenses. So with permissive licenses, you can do whatever you want, almost, with open source software. Non-permissive licenses, they have some restrictions if you build your own solution and you want to redistribute it, yeah? But open source does not mean no money. Open source does not come without total cost of ownership. but it moves from capital expenditures to more operational expenditures. So turning open source into business model explains, okay, but when I give open source software away for free, so how does business can occur here at all? And this is a very simple explanation how that works. Is three examples. One is you build your product completely on your own in-house. Netflix is a very prominent example. They did it, and everything what they did in order to provide their streaming services has been published as open source. Or you take an open source product, make some variations out of it, or you take an open source product and you rebuild a complete other product out of it, which is called a fork. So these are the three building blocks of making business out of open source. At the end of the day, you have an open source product. There's three ways to launch it to the market. Either to open core. You can, for example, provide it as a standard feature, a standard product, free of charge, and you have an enterprise version where you charge for. Or you wrap services around to get business out of it. And how important this became to the industry will be shown here. And surprisingly, you have Microsoft in the area of generating business out of an open source model. This is very surprising, where Microsoft 10 years ago stated that open source is the evil in the software industry. So they completely turned around 180 degrees. And just to show the market capitalization of open source, I just took some snippet out of the internet, and here you can see the 180-degree turn of Microsoft when they acquired GitLab. You see that the acquisition of Red Hat by IBM was the biggest acquisition in the open source world ever seen, with $34 billion. And there is a prediction or a statistic that open source business generated $25 billion in 2022 with an estimated growth rate of round about 16% year per year. So this is a tremendous business coming out of software which does not cost anything. There is a flip side to everything. Even when you may realize that I'm a bit in favor for digital sovereignty, there is a big flip side. And for that flip side, I would like to show, the experience I made with Microsoft. Microsoft Office 364, everybody knows it. It's a very well-rounded, complete suite, ready to use. You just have to sign your subscription, pay your fee, and it is ready to use. You have nothing to do. Really nothing. And that's very convenient for companies, and I fully understand this. The equivalent to Microsoft 365 looks like this. So you need a bunch of different open source products, even not tied to each other, in order to comply with the feature and function set Office 365 provides today. And this is not manageable by many of the companies. They simply do not have the time and budget to do it. But again, I don't come with bad news when there are not good news attached to it. The German government, for example, funds a project which is called OpenDesk. And OpenDesk has the aim or the target to bring these bundles together and to provide the same user experience like you have for 365 to the consumer market, but purely based on open source software. This has just been kicked off a year ago. A company called Zendis, which is part of the government stream, so-called. They are funded to do that. And I have already applied with my team to be one of the early birds to run a proof of concept with that OpenDesk software in my district. I'm very looking much forward to, but it will come with hurdles. And the main hurdle will be the employee working with it on a day-to-day basis when they don't find the button anymore where it used to be at the end of the day. So this is absolutely something I have to recognize in that area. But the cost savings attached to it, they are too interesting not to go that path. Another flip side, workforce skills. So the learning curve for managing, operating commercial software versus open source is tremendously higher. And again, many companies, their core business is not digitalization, it's just the base to run their core purpose, their main purpose they are built for, so they have no ambition to skill and build an IT department with software developers just to run open source software. They see the subscription, they see the easy way to use it, why not using it? And I'm not arguing against this. I can fully understand it. On the other hand, I made a calculation. I said, the amount of money I'm spent on a year-to-year basis to companies where I have to run subscriptions with in order to use their software is an equivalent of, I would say, 10 to 12 DevOps engineers. And if I would have the choice where to spend my money for, I would spend it into human beings rather than into big companies. And I think with 10 to 12 developer operations engineers, I would be capable to rip and replace many of the commercial software which is still running in my data center. But this is theory. I can't flip that around from one day to the other. This is a long-term strategy, but I just would like to combine two numbers with each other. So, as we mentioned, what at all has Maggie Thatcher to do with that? And Maggie Thatcher made one statement which is, for me, leading guidance. I'm spending your money. As long as you are a German taxpayer, I'm spending your money on a day-to-day basis. And there is no public money. It's taxpayers' money. And that is my obligation to spend this money as careful as possible. And digital sovereignty is one way doing that. Thank you very much.